Welcome to the third season of Heard Afros and Audio's interview series. My guest today is Daniel Douglas. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. As I said, it's really exciting to get this opportunity to talk to you more. We met for the first time at Podcast Movement last year. And then again, thank you for attending Afros and Audio and experiencing that with us. So I'm really looking forward to now getting to know more about you as a creative and what you've been up to for your time here on Earth. So we're going to jump right in. Okay.
Okay.
You've been behind the camera since the age of 13. How has your early start shaped your approach to visual storytelling today?
That's an interesting question because how I got started in photography, just a real quick story. My dad passed away when I was 12 years old. I have five sisters and just me. So my mother really didn't know what to do with me because my father took care of me. So to keep me off the streets, she said, I don't care what you do after school, you're going to take something at the local community center. And so I'm like, okay, I listened to my mother and I went down to the local community center and they had a photography course there taught by the only African American photographer in town. And so I'm like, okay, I'll try this. I tried it because they had girls in the class. But when I did it, I ended up really liking the medium and all of that. And I just stayed with it all this time.
And how has it shaped the way you tell your stories visually?
I learned from Mr. Carter about storytelling. The very first image I took was of a parade. And I forget the model, but it was a press camera. And when he sent a couple of us out to shoot this parade, he gave us kind of a background on how to tell the story. I didn't know what I was doing at the time. So the image came out sideways and all of that. But when I took it back and we developed it because he taught us how to develop film as well, the way he critiqued it was interesting. Not in the sense that you messed up and you did wrong, but here's how you can do better. And so that stuck with me over the years that no matter how I shoot, if it's not right, learn how to do it better the next time. The image behind me is one that I shot in DC in a workshop. And I have some other ones around here in my office as well. So I constantly look at these images and say, how can I do better? What did I do with this image that I could have improved on? So you move forward now here. I recently relocated to Central Virginia from Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. And so I'm rebuilding and trying to get the brand restarted. Now, I've been here for 4 years in August of this year. So I'm trying to rebuild, and I'm really looking at what do I want to do moving forward with photography? Do I want to continue to shoot portraits? Yeah, probably not. So I'm looking more on the commercial line of photography, specifically products for photography. I'm looking at doing more headshots and corporate events.
All right, thank you. So, photography is often described as capturing a moment in time. How do you translate that same ethos into your podcast, making sense of technology and multimedia?
I'm in the process now of rebranding, and I talked to Josh Wilcox at Afros and Audio in Baltimore, and he gave me some terrific insight. One of the things he said to me, and I think this all ties in with the backstory. When I saw Josh after the opening party, I walked up to him and started talking to him. He said, I was going to say something last night, but I changed my mind. And I asked him, what were you going to say? He said, about your podcast. And so I said to him, Josh, I'm really here to learn. So you can't hurt my feelings. Just tell me what it is. And he said, I thought your name for your podcast was too long, making sense of technology and multimedia. And that had already been on my mind prior to going to Podcast Movement in
Mhm.
National Harbor. And I said to Josh, I said, I've been thinking along those lines. And so as we were talking, he asked me more about the podcast. And he said, too broad based. And so I sat back and I listened. We talked about 40, 45 minutes. And I agreed with a lot that he said. So I'm rebranding that podcast. And the name right now is called the Creators Toolkit. I have a technology background, and I was doing too much in the way of technology and not on the creative side of photography and videography, which is what I do.
Hmm.
By rebranding it, and am I going to stick with that name? I don't know, probably. But I'm going back to my roots, so to speak. I love technology, so I will talk about AI, but AI as it pertains to the creative side in photography and in videography mainly, because there are a lot of tools out there. I'm not anti AI, but I talk to a lot of photographers who it's going to take our jobs and all that. I don't feel that way. So I don't know if that answered the question because I kind of go
No,
off
no,
a little bit.
it's all good. We're just talking about the ethos of the podcast,
Right.
and what's great about that story is that one, you're willing to take the feedback. You have a
Right.
foundation, which is the podcast. You've done the work. You were ready for a shift, and coming to Afros and Audio, and I'm sure other spaces
Mhm.
became a catalyst for you to make those moves and listen to that feedback that someone was willing to give you, because he could have kept his mouth shut the whole time, and so that's an opportunity that we have. But again, you've already laid a foundation. You've already done a lot of the work, where the pivot is not such a hard thing to release. It's okay, where else can I go with the work? Just like you're talking about with photography. So it's an expansion, it's an evolution. And what else are we doing if we're not evolving the
Yeah,
craft?
and see, the thing is, I learned a lot. A lot of this podcasting stuff for me is self-taught,
Hmm.
and I never heard of Podcast Movement. And when I met you at Podcast Movement, I never heard of Afros in Audio. I never heard of the Black Podcasters Association. Never heard of any of these things,
Hmm.
and it really resonated with me because the journey of my podcast started out as the photographer's notebook. And so I rebranded to making sense of technology and multimedia. And I'm like, I'm all over the space here. What do I do? And coming to Afros in Audio really was an eye opener and said, you need to really dig into this a little bit deeper and don't go all over the planet with it. And I have a saying, go for what you know.
Hmm.
And that's where I am right now, trying to rebrand the podcast now based upon what I know.
You're simply evolving and pivoting in a way that helps to sustain the work that you're already doing. You could do so many things. You can talk about so many things, and you can do that in different areas.
Right,
Multimedia,
right,
right? This is what
right,
it's all about.
right.
You can do it in podcasting. You do it through your photography. You can do it speaking. That's its own thing. It's being able to step in this space with a knowledge, an experience,
Mhm.
and share that is what is the most important, and streamlining it and doing it so that your listeners, it makes sense to them in a way that supports you and your endeavors, I think is something that we have to learn. It's a part of the learning and growing inside of the craft.
One
So
of the
yeah, I
things,
get it.
too, I struggle with building the listener persona.
Hmm.
I know what that is, but I don't know how to do it. In talking with you, Minister Jazz, Corey, Josh, all of you just opened my eyes and gave me, I guess, the direction that I needed. Will it work? Will the Creators Toolkit work? Don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know until I release it sometime next month. But now that I have knowledge, I can put it to use and then build off of that.
Absolutely. Knowledge without application is just knowledge.
Right.
So respect. So your podcast explores, as it is now, tools, trends, and techniques in multimedia.
Right.
What's one technology you think has had the biggest impact on creative industries in the past decade?
Ooh, there's so many of them. I'll tell you what works for me is AI voice. I did a podcast in 2022 when I first moved here in my new location. And I interviewed a guy in Paris. He lives in Paris, France. and he has a company that was doing AI voice technology at the time. And this is before Chat GPT hit the thing and 11 Labs and all of that. And maybe about 3 weeks ago, I re listened to that podcast and I'm like, you know what? You've been talking about this stuff for a long time. So take that knowledge and try to build off of that. So I think for me, AI voice technology is the biggest one. I actually used it when I couldn't speak. I had already cloned my voice. And so I did a podcast and I let the listeners know up front that this is my cloned voice because I had a problem in speaking at the time.
Mm.
And so that technology is very interesting to me, is AI voice. It's a whole bunch of them that I'm in tune to. I think the second one would be on transcription. I've been a fan of Otter AI from almost the beginning. I use for video editing, I use DaVinci Resolve. I have the studio version, which has transcription built into it. And this technology just fascinates me. How in the heck can they do all of this stuff? So I think those are the two things that really stand out for me: AI voice technology and transcription.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I appreciate that insight. I've used 11 Labs for providing an audio aspect of a blog.
Mm,
So, not necessarily podcast, but I wrote a blog, I throw it in 11 Lab, I have my voice clone, I let it read it for me. So, I don't have to do it and have 10 takes because I'm reading the same line over and I want to start
right,
punching things.
right,
It's one of those things where you bring up a great point about even the accessibility. I did it for the accessibility for people who are visually impaired. Here's the audio version of it, but I don't have to sit and time consume and do it myself.
right.
I wrote it. So it's still me. It's still my voice, my writing, but allow the technology to support us. And when you talked about having an issue at the time with your voice and being able to speak, but having access to something that can do it for you, but again, it's you're the source,
Right.
you're the content. This is just something that aids. And not just you, but for other people who benefit from it because you were able to use software. So yeah, it is very important. And the technology, as we both know, is important for us to use, be aware of, not be afraid of it, and implement it into our workflows because people are doing that. And the more we resist it, the further behind we get.
And I want to add something to that. As I mentioned at the top, that I'm looking more on the commercial side of photography, specifically product photography. So to build out that portfolio, I don't have any of those images right now in my portfolio. So I'm in the process now, it's a personal project of shooting. And I guess I was told one time before I shoot myself in the foot because I like to photograph liquids, beverages. And that's one of the hardest. You're shooting a bottle, you're shooting a liquid. Reflections are going all over the place. So I decided to do Gentleman Jack as a starting point. And I have a bottle of Jack sitting in my closet right now, waiting. And I said, I've never done product photography before. I get it, but how do I start? So you mentioned about adding technology to the workflow. So I said, let me do that. Let me go to Chat GPT, and I built a agent or whatever you want to call it, a custom GPT. And I said, gave it the parameters. I use a framework called Craft, giving it context, role, etc. And I said, here's what I want to do. Give me some ideas. Now, the thing about it is, I talked to one photographer maybe a year and a half ago, and he said to me, but yeah, you're letting the technology do all the work for you. No, I'm not. I'm just using it as a tool. I'm using it because I've never done product photography before. I know about it, but give me some ideas. I'm shooting a bottle of Gentleman Jack. Give me the background of Gentleman Jack whiskey. Instead of me going out to Google and finding this, let ChatGPT or Claude go out and do that research for me. Let Perplexity AI go out and do that research for me. Then take all of that information, put it together, and then come up with my own concept. So that's another way that I'm using the technology in my workflow right now. And to me,
Mhm.
it's pretty exciting. I could talk about this stuff all day long.
Oh, me too. Me too. As we know, our greatest currency is our time.
Right.
And to have something that supports efficiency and time is
Mm-hmm.
everything. And again, this is the point of the work that we do as creatives, being able to speak up and say, listen, I get it. I get your resistance. I get your thoughts around it.
Right.
But you try it one time and see how efficient your workflow becomes. And I guarantee you, you won't want to do something without it again.
Right.
It's up to us to speak on it and be informative around it and share in the ways that we don't stop being the artist or the creative because we have implemented tools that can help us do more
Right.
and quickly. So yeah, absolutely. So very informative, and I appreciate you adding that. You said that embracing this is what we're talking about right now. Technology is essential. How do you help listeners overcome the intimidation or overwhelm that often comes with new tools and platforms?
I think, being honest, that was something that was lacking on making sense of technology and multimedia. And by using the technology moving forward in rebranding, using the information that I got from Josh, using the information that I got from one of his programs that he sells, that I actually purchased at Afros and Audio Festival, that helped me out immensely. So again, I turned to technology and I said, okay, I'm not a brand strategist. Help me rebrand this podcast. And one of the things that it came back with that I didn't know is exactly what you just said. How am I helping my listeners? And so ChatGPT came back and said, what are your listeners' pain points? Never thought about that.
Mhm.
So I started looking to see, okay, so I can't really directly answer your question because I never did it with the other two, the way I branded the podcasts before. But moving forward, that information will come about. So I'm still working on that now. How do I
Mhm.
help these listeners? I have to give them something to help them overcome those pain points. And so I'm working that out right now.
Okay. All right. Listen, again, we experience, we experiment, and then we learn how to move different.
Right.
So it's exciting to know that will now be a part of the messaging, a
Mm-hmm.
part of what people can appreciate and expect from the podcast. How has meeting people, like you said, at Afros and Audio, people like Josh, even again, we met at Podcast Movement, and we weren't the largest group of folks there, but we were there. And the things that we did contributed to the overall experience. How has that impacted the journey for you now as both a creator and educator?
I can tell you that when I came back, a couple of people, including some family members, asked me about it. And I'm going to be very upfront. I said, I have never been around, and I'm specifically talking about Afros and Audio podcasts. And I talked about both Podcast Movement, and I have nothing negative to say about Podcast Movement. But I've never been around more African American people that had their act together and on the move ever in my life. And I was bubbling with that. I can't tell you even the after parties and some of the vendors that you had there. I talked to as many people as I could about whatever they wanted to talk about, whatever they asked me to talk about. I'm lost for words, really, to tell you how meeting the people has influenced my decision moving forward with the Creators Toolkit. It's just,
Mm.
I'm lost for words, actually. I'm really lost for words because it was that good. And I'm looking forward to the next one in October.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really meaningful that you say that, because that's the point and purpose of it. And of course, you get out of anything what you put in. And I think I've told you this before, but your presence was very much appreciated, and contribution to it as well. We show up for ourselves as much as we do for each other at Afros and Audio. So it wouldn't have been the same without you either, Daniel. So I really appreciate those words and the fact that you'll be back. That means a lot to me. So thank you.
The other thing is, I stayed in touch with a couple of folks. Being a photographer, I'm there, I'm snapping all these photographs and all of this. And I've shared some of the images with a couple of the people that reached out to me. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I could just express how much that conference, that festival meant to me, even more so than Podcast Movement. Again, I didn't know any of this stuff. Even when I talked to Minister Jazz and she talked to me, she said, "What GPT are you working on?" And so we talked for a minute, and she said, "Didn't you say you wanted me to be on your show?" And I said that to you too at Podcast
Hmm.
Movement. She said, "I said, yeah. How come you haven't reached out to me?" I said, "I'm not ready yet." I want to, I wish I could express in words how much that meant to me. And I'm not saying this because you have me on this podcast show and it's good. I truly mean what I'm telling you, that it has changed my life in terms of podcasting. It's changed my life in terms of how and what I want to shoot. It The impact on me has been so great. It's just hard for me to explain.
You might be lost for words, but I receive it all. I get it. We have a way of being able to talk without words anyway. So
Right.
trust me, I feel it. I understand what you're saying. I understand. And again, I'm so appreciative. That's what it's all about. It's intentional that this community creates that sense of belonging,
Mhm.
opportunity, reflection, transformation. All of that is what it's for. And so, for anyone to come out of it with that exact experience, then the intention has been met. And again, I really appreciate you sharing that. So, you're passionate about shared learning. This is what we're talking about, right?
Right.
What we do together.
Right.
How do you foster collaboration and growth amongst your listeners and followers? Or is that something, again, that you're looking forward to doing
That's
in the
something
new iteration?
that's something I'm looking forward
Hmm.
to doing.
Okay.
And just to not sound like a broken record, that was missing from the podcasts that I had done. I started in 2019. I didn't know it was missing. I didn't know it until I went to Podcast Movement, and even more so when I came to Afros and Audio's podcast festival. That's when it really opened my eyes. What's missing? Why am I not getting listeners? People are coming to my podcast. I'm looking at the stats and I'm saying, okay, back in 2020, when you did this during the pandemic, which episodes was gaining the most traction? And I looked at it. It was a couple of young brothers in Atlanta that I interviewed, just starting out. Now they're blowing up. So I'm saying, I'm looking at these, and again, I gained this insight again from Podcast Movement and from Afros and Audio to go back and look at these things and see what resonated with these folks and then why,
Hmm.
and then build off of that. And I wasn't looking at that before. I don't have a problem in being in front of the camera. I don't have a problem being on the microphone. I have no problems with interviewing people, asking the questions. But if you're not asking the right questions or if you're not engaging them, then that's, to me, that's a problem. And I think
Hmm.
that's what was lacking.
Yeah. And you had to learn that. Kudos to you for being in the game since 2019, for staying in it. At any point, you could have said, the numbers aren't where I want them to be, the engagement's not where I want to be, maybe this isn't it. But it's so important that we stay in this industry for a number of reasons. But the fact that you are bringing value, one, to photography. This is something that we've been doing for years as photojournalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's we all of us as creatives have been called in some ways to share our living experiences, what we've been through, where
Right.
we're going, and the people that we connect with. I just want to say you are staying in the podcast industry, sticking with the podcast, and simply iterating it again. That is your prerogative, and this is your platform.
Right.
So I really look forward to you implementing what you know now into making an even greater opportunity. And the great thing also is that you still have all this evergreen content that once people do get tapped in and engaged,
Mm-hmm.
they still have all this content and these interviews to binge and look forward to and get into. So that work is not in vain at all. And that's the
I,
important part.
pod fading started to set in. And prior to
Hmm.
coming to Afros and Audio, I started questioning myself and saying, do I want to continue doing this? And if so, how am I going to do it? I thought
Yeah.
about changing up completely the format and doing something dumb to gain listeners. And I said, but that's not me. Again, is to go for what I do photography. I've been doing it for a long time. I've shot video. I'm not great at video, but I'm getting better. I'm working on doing a documentary. Never done this before, ever. And I attended a workshop last night, actually. It's the fifth workshop done by a documentary professor at one of the colleges. And he's doing this for free. And so I'm working on doing that. And we talked about doing the pitch decks last night at the workshop. Again, these are terminologies, some of them I've heard about. Well, what's a pitch deck? And so, again, these are things that I'd like to do. And I want to move forward with it. So I'm just, again, taking all this knowledge and just absorbing it and now putting it into practice.
Yeah, yeah. And the importance of learning, right? A lot of times we may not know all of the pieces or understand how to do a thing,
Mm,
but the opportunity to learn what you don't know to create what you want is there. And I think it's a really important message that you're speaking on right now, that no matter where we are in life, learning is still accessible to us. And sometimes we want to just move and be in motion and
right.
just jump into the next thing. But there's that opportunity to pause and learn what you don't know to improve on the craft or create something new. And
You
yeah,
just gave me something. I grabbed my notepad here. I'm
okay.
taking
All right. All right.
again. I'm learning. Even in this interview, you said something that like, oh wow, he just made a good point. Write that down before you forget it.
All
You go ahead
right.
and talk while I write.
When you think about how you bridge the worlds of photography, videography, live streaming,
Hmm.
and podcasting into a single platform, what has that meant to you to be able to do those things?
It started out as just something to do. So it really, I had no thoughts about what it meant to me. Again, after attending Afros and Audio, you hear me repeat this all the time because it's just been so great. And meeting the various people and listening to them talk about their podcasts and what it meant to them. And I said to myself, what does this mean to me? And it means basically for me is sharing my knowledge. I was asked last night about the documentary that I'm working on. Do I want to make money off of this? And I said to him, I'm not going to say no. I said, but I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it. And so you move forward to 2025, 2024, 2025. During the podcast, I'm passionate about it. I want to share my knowledge. I want to share the information. And if you can use it and it helps you, then great. And why am I saying that? Folks like you, Josh, Corey, Jazz, all the other people that I met that I can't remember their names, they shared their information with me. They didn't say, hey, give me $5 and I'll tell you how to do this. They shared that information with me. That resonated with me. It means a lot. If you give, you'll get it back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving knowledge. Again, I can talk about photography for hours until you tell me, all right, I got to go. But I want to give that information.
Mm-hmm.
And not as a professional photographer. I'm looking at doing things with the iPhone. It's got great technology on it. And you really don't need an expensive camera like the one I have behind me to do great shots.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, moving with the Creators Toolkit, I want to give this information. If I can make $5 off of it, great. But that's not my goal. That's not what I'm after. I'm after sharing that knowledge because if I give you that knowledge, you're going to give it back to me,
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Yeah,
that is.
absolutely. And as we continue creating, and then as you mentioned, start to really understand the gravity of what we're expressing, right? You are
Mhm,
expressing,
mhm,
and you said knowledge. I'm going to say hard earned knowledge, right? You did the work. You've been in these places and spaces, created a lane for yourself, and learned as you've gone. It becomes even a more liberating experience. We are constantly becoming, and in that process.
mhm,
And so each thing that you do now, moving into becoming a documentary creator, that's so liberating as a creator itself because you're moving all of these ideas inside you out and sharing them with the world. Liberation is something that I always feel is the greatest opportunity for us as creators, and not to think that we're just doing something. It's not a
mhm.
just anything. There's work that's being created and it's important work. And the download came to you because you were absolutely the person to make it happen. Or else it would have went to another of the 8 billion. And so it's important work. So I'm glad that you are continuing to explore your creativity because I'm sure everything that you've done in the past, at this point forward, will show how much more liberated and free you are as a creative.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's a great evolution.
outside of the thing space, outside of photography, videography, even in my career in technology, I learned from people that were giving this information. In technology, you can spend thousands of dollars out of your pocket educating
Hmm.
yourself, which I have done. But I also had mentors, people that were willing to give this information and help me along. And that means a lot to me. So, why would I go out? Sure, if I can do a tutorial and sell it, great. That's business. But by the same token, I've learned from a lot of folks looking at a bunch of YouTube channels, um, other things. I look at these folks and they're saying, hey, I made this plugin, you can have it because I want you to get better.
Hmm.
But I've got another version of this plugin that I'll sell you if you want to, but you don't need it. I like that. Okay. That means a lot to me. The only African American photographer in miles around where I lived
Hmm.
gave his time to teach these black kids photography. He gave that time. My mother gave her time to counsel young girls incarcerated in county jails. She gave her time and then she would go to work and make the money. So I learned from all of this.
Hmm.
And I guess all these years, I'm not going to say how old I am, but all these years, it just, again, if you're always taking, you're never going to get anything back.
There you go.
You're never going to get anything back. And I'm a true
Mm.
believer of that. I'm hoping that the rebrand of the podcast, I can deliver what I'm preaching right now. If not, I'll find out how to do
You sure will. I believe that. So,
it.
what role do you believe creators like yourself play in shaping the conversation around technology and creativity?
I think I can be pretty convincing. I've been called a gearhead because I spent 20 years in the tech field. These cameras now, and that's one of the things that I'm looking at putting in the blog moving forward, is those cameras, the one behind me, is full of AI, but people just don't realize it.
Mm,
It just goes over their head. Autofocus, that's AI. Tracking the eye, that's AI. It's built into these. That camera is nothing more than a computer.
hmm
Okay. But you have to look at it as such and then say, how do I use that computer camera and make it do what I want to do and not what it wants to do? So I'm hoping that moving forward with the Creators Toolkit, I can convey that information to people who may not have as much experience as I have and bring them up, or people that have experience. I've learned stuff from people. I'm like, I've been shooting all this time since 13 years old. I didn't know that.
mm,
So I'm hoping that I can convey that moving forward.
absolutely. What's the legacy? What are you hoping to leave behind, create? And when I say leave behind, I'm not talking about we out of here in a few short years. I'm just talking about legacy, living legacy, right? Where do you see Creators Toolkit 5 years from now? And what legacy do you hope to leave in podcasting and multimedia communities?
I don't know if I can answer that question. It's a good question. I guess that's something that I have to put into the Creators Toolkit moving forward. In other words, putting it in there. What legacy do you want to create or leave behind? I've never been asked that question before. I don't know how to answer it. That's another
Hmm.
thing I need to write down.
All right. I think what's great about legacy in general is that in everything that we do, we're leaving this mark, right? We're carving out a piece of
Mhm.
this world for ourselves, the people that get to experience us. In that lies our legacy and why I love podcasting so much, for the opportunity and access for so many people to be able to do this, is that every time you share a lived experience, it's something that you're laying down a record for. It's something that goes down in history. You're archiving your experiences. It becomes a time capsule for what you're doing in 2025, for what you did in 2019. You shared some things, and that will last for a long time. And so I think even when we're not maybe conscious of our legacy, it's happening. It's happening in real time.
And see, I just learned something because I was going to stop and say, what's your legacy? But you just told me, you just explained it. I think that's a really good way of looking at it because it never registered before of a legacy. I guess I've been talking about it all along, just didn't realize it.
Hmm. For sure.
Just didn't realize it. Wow.
All right. All right. I've appreciated this conversation. I want to know two things from you.
Okay.
One, how can we support you? Whether it's listening to the podcast that's out now, rallying around you and supporting you on the relaunch, anything that you can think of that's a call to action for the folks who are watching and listening to this episode.
By allowing me to come on your podcast show, Heard, and just rambling on about my story will help. People like Josh, when I posted something on LinkedIn, he DM'd me and said, "Hey, if you're struggling with something, let me know. Tell me where you're going." I didn't ask for any of this. You're giving it to me. When I respond to other folks, they respond back to me and let me know what you're doing. Keep me informed. So I say keep doing what you're doing because it's really helping me. And if I can say anything to folks, a quick story, just real short. One of my sisters who lives in Philadelphia, she's an occupational therapist. And she was one of my family members that asked me, how was the conference in Baltimore? And I was just beaming and bubbling. She shared with me some things that she wanted to start doing. And she said she had been in talks with someone else and she started reaching out to me. So I shared information with her that I learned at both podcast events. And I said, now when it comes to technology, she's all thumbs. So I said, why don't you let me produce the podcast for you and help you get started in that? I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't learned this information from movement and afros and audio. I have the gear, the equipment here to do it. So that's not an issue for me. So I say, anybody's watching this, if you're curious about podcasting, I think podcasting is great. I think it's great. I would even look at maybe doing a radio show because that's just me. I'm always trying to do something different. And as we get older, your brain is a muscle and you have to exercise it. I'm a sponge. I need and want to learn as much as possible. So anybody who's even remotely thinking about doing this, afros and audio is one place that you really need to pay attention to. The Black Podcasters Association is something that you really need to pay attention to. Those two right there have tentacles that branch out. It's just amazing about the information that you can glean from folks like yourself who's willing to depart with the information. There's people out there, you guys are monetizing and you're selling services and all that. If you can't do it on your own, get somebody else to do it for you. If I
Yeah.
lived in New York or something like that, I would head up to Brooklyn and use Josh's studio if I needed studio space. Reach out and touch these organizations, especially if you look like us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to movement, I was just like, okay, it's podcasting. There's a couple of brothers and sisters out there doing things that I've seen before, but I didn't know it was as broad for us as it is when I came to Baltimore in October.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to building and creating with you more, seeing what you get up to with the Creators Toolkit and the documentary. I'm excited about that as well. The future's bright. Just a quick story. I had a interview yesterday
Mm-hmm.
with a woman named Moniece Mitchell Sims, and her episode will be coming out as well. And she said something so powerful to me, which was that creators, writers, storytellers are the essential workers of the world. We are sharing this knowledge, our experiences, and telling stories that matter to us to keep us filled up, fueled, and stay in the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I honor the fact that you are here, you're still creating, and you're still growing. That's such an important message for so many of us, no matter where we are in our creative journeys. There's so much more, and we don't have to be distracted or stifle ourselves from the things that we want to do. So, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate this conversation. Tell people how they can find you online, listen to the podcast.
They can find me on Instagram at Daniel Douglas Photography. I'm on LinkedIn again, uh, /in/Daniel Douglas. Um, I'm working on rebuilding the website, but I'll give you the link anyway. It's danieldouglasphotography.com. I am on X. Don't know how long I'm staying on X. My YouTube channel, which is going to change, it is Click Media Productions. And that is something that I haven't really jumped into a lot, but that's something I'm going to be doing a lot more of. So Click
All
Media
right.
Productions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate the
I
conversation
really
today.
appreciate it too. And one more shout out to Demetrius. I can't forget him.
All right. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Demetrius. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.